Jude and Grant send their apologies, so I am the second reserve. So I pleasure to welcome Boyd Swinburn, who I'm sure doesn't really need an introduction, obviously a professor here in population nutrition and global health, and Boyd is also organising or co-organising this year the seminar, so we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So I don't know what anyone else was doing at 3 a.m. on the 27th of August last year, but Boyd was having an epiphany that the driving force behind the obesity pandemic was actually the interactions between two complex adaptive systems, the ultra-processed food system and energy balance. And he is wants to get a few things out of this seminar. He's going to present this theory of the obesity pandemic, and he wants to get feedback on whether it makes sense and it's novel and is useful. So time for asking questions, commenting, and wants to explain systems methods and systems thinking. So yeah, he really wants to be able to, people from systems dynamic experts to lay people to be able to understand these interactions, and even us as well as his colleagues. And he presented this last week to a systems, we're just talking about that, to a systems kind of conference meeting. And I guess we'll be a different audience with potentially, public health kind of expertise, but not necessarily, not all of us. Some of us are still thinking in straight lines, but Boyd will try and get us thinking more in circles with arrows. Okay, so I'll leave it over to you, Boyd, and I'm happy to help facilitate questions next.
Okay, thanks. Thanks very much indeed, Catherine. And as Catherine said, we're helping to coordinate the Head of School seminar series, myself, Felicity Goodyear-Smith, and Denise Newman. So we're a little bit late in getting started this year, and we didn't have anyone for February, so I've jumped in because I wanted to present this and get some feedback. But if you have ideas about key people who you want to invite for these Head of School seminars, visiting experts that you have, visiting scholars, and so on, I think please let us know. We'd like to get them on the list, and this is an election year, so we might have one or two of them with a little bit of a flavour about what might be coming up in the election discussions. Anyway, so yes, I'm going to talk about what's driving the obesity pandemic, and yes, I did have a bit of an epiphany, so I've been a little bit like a boy that's just seen the Virgin Mary. So I've been talking to people about it, anybody who'll listen. But the big challenge is kind of being able to explain it so it makes sense. So Catherine's already mentioned this. I want to present this theory. I want to get feedback on it. And I want to explain some of the underpinning systems thinking and methods, because I appreciate this is not necessarily bread and butter methods for people here, and it is quite a different way of doing research, using group model building, creating causal loop diagrams, doing system dynamics modeling. So I'd like to just introduce you to some of that as we go. And this has come out of like 38 years of thinking about this, and in the middle of the 1990s, Gary Egger and I came up with this concept of the obesogenic environment, this thinking about obesity as a normal physiology within a pathological environment. We sort of then divided this up into different types of environments and different sizes of environments and so on, without any connections kind of between them. And then for the first Lancet series on obesity, we kind of put it into this linear format, saying, yes, there are systemic drivers, policy and economic systems that enable high consumption of food, and that results in the food supply and marketing environments that we experience, and that changes our behaviour patterns. And we framed these environmental moderators as things like socio-cultural, economic, recreation, transport environments, which can either accentuate the rise in obesity within the population or attenuate it. And we're seeing that diversity of responses to the epidemic come out now much more with these whole global studies. So this is a bit linear. And if there is something which is growing and expanding, you better go find some reinforcing loops that are keeping that going, that are driving it. And so we're taking kind of a dive in at this level here. So this is the problem. These are 21 regions around the world, and the sort of red and yellow and orange is overweight and obesity. The green and the blue is normal weight. And you can see that every region, and if you dive down into a country level, every country is increasing in obesity. So this is truly a global phenomenon, a pandemic. And you can also see that there are quite different rates of change. Some of them are quite flat up here, you know, there's high income Asian populations like Singapore, Japan, South Korea, very high rates in Polynesia and Micronesia and Middle East and North Africa. This is us up here, high income English speaking countries, fatter than our cousins across the, well, our sort of genetic cousins probably for most of us across the channel into Europe. So those are the two things we draw out of that. So what's driving this? Now, no country wants an increasing obesity epidemic. No country wants, because of the consequences, especially for diabetes. And we have 1 billion people who are currently overweight. So that's, 1 in 8 people who have obesity at the moment. And hardly any of them want it. And they're fighting against it. So whatever these forces are that are driving it is against the will of the countries and the people. So it has to be really very powerful indeed. We know lots of bits about and lots of associations with obesity, which I'll show in a second. But so we know quite a lot, but there's no coherent theory of what's driving this. And this is what I'm trying to get at. And I was just thinking, when was the last time that we had a pandemic for which we had no plausible explanation? And I think it was pre-1860s and the advent of the germ theory for infectious diseases. So, the world at that time had a lot of infectious diseases with no coherent theory about what was driving it. Well, we're in a similar position now, except now we know a hell of a lot about it, but we haven't kind of put it together. So, out of that, that graph I showed you before about the countries, there's 2 questions: what's driving up the obesity pandemic in every country, and what's creating the heterogeneity of countries as they go up? I'm only answering the first one. The second one is more complex. And it's probably the next stage, but let's start simple and just try to answer what's going up. So this is how we normally think about the cause of obesity. We chuck it into an onion ring thing like this with the socio-ecological causes, and we have a whole lot of bullet points. And these are all bona fide associations with obesity at an individual level or a societal level. And this is probably only a smattering of them. Say there's 100 associations. Okay, which ones out of that do we think are actually drivers and causing this thing, or are just associations or moderators? So trying to extract causality from this kind of a mind map is actually really quite hard. So I think if we're going to have an overall theory for the obesity pandemic, it has to explain a bunch of things. It's got to be global. So this is not just, America now has high fructose corn syrup from corn, and that's driving it, or the Americans got the dietary guidelines wrong. No. This is absolutely global. Africa, Asia, the works. So whatever the forces are, they're global. And they're extremely powerful, as I said. This is a kind of a Godzilla of a force because it's against the country's will and people's will, and a lot of actions, at least at the individual level. And I think this is a bit of a challenge. The number 3 is a big one because it has to be somewhat familiar because we know a lot, but also has to be quite novel so we can actually see what the problem is. And this is part of the challenge I've had in explaining this. People say, oh, yeah, we kind of know this stuff. Just like people say, we know systems because we live in systems. But I think this is a bit of a challenge. We need to see the unseen whole of the causality. And to do that, it needs to be systems thinking because these are systemic problems. So that means we have to be thinking about feedback loops, emergent properties, systems purposes, all those kind of parameters. And the iceberg is a common simplified way of saying what is systems thinking. And most of our efforts and most of what we measure and think about and respond to are the visible parameters on the top of the system, the stuff that we can see. Underneath that, driving that, is the relationships between the elements. So it's not just the parameters, but not just the boxes, but it's the arrows. How do they join up? How do they link up? And in particular, how do they link up in circles? How do they link up as positive or negative feedback loops? Because they determine system behavior. Underneath those relationships are these structures determining the relationships and the parameters. Policy for man-made things, it's policies, institutions, flows of funding, and so on. And right at the bottom are mindsets or values, which are shaping the direction of the system. Now, I'm going to be talking about the energy balance system, which is obviously physiological, so it doesn't have a mindset or values. But at that bottom piece, you could say, what is the purpose of the system? What is the goal of the system? What's it trying to drive? In man-made systems, these are driven by our values and our mindsets. But in a physiological system, they still have goals. These systems still have goals. They exhibit goal-seeking behavior. So that systems thinking is a wider picture of systems thinking, and then within that are a set of specific systems methods that you may or may not be familiar with. But the big 3 sets of methods are social network analysis, understanding how stuff flows across networks, agent-based modeling, where you give properties to agents and they operate over time. All of these systems methods operate over time. And system dynamics, which is what I'm going to talk about, which can be qualitative or quantitative. So the methods that we use to analyse these 2 systems, the ultra-processed food system and the energy balance system, so first of all, the ultra-processed food system. So we created causal loop diagrams of the ultra-processed food system. And this was work that Ben Wood did, who's at Deakin University, and Josh Clark, who is a public health medicine registrar with us. And these are like reviews, but when we do a review, when we think about a review of an issue, we go to the literature and find all the papers and join them in a table and try to make sense out of it. This type of a review is different. You sit down with a bunch of experts who kind of know the field and know about marketing, know about industrial food process, and you download their mental models. You download what do you think is happening? What is cause and effect here? And so you start with this kind of group model building, which seems a bit weird for us, just getting people around and downloading what they think. But this is creating the concepts, and you get the concepts right. And then Ben and Josh went off to see whether these concepts, with all these boxes and arrows, did actually have evidence in the literature. And so it's not a table that you end up with; it's a causal loop diagram. The second model is the one we used for model of energy balance. And this is it goes through the same sort of process. You get experts who've been thinking about energy balance and what are their conceptual models, how do they hang this together? and get that down on paper. And getting it down on paper is a big discipline. That's hard work because you have to specify all of the variables and their relationships. And this one, then you go and find data for each of the boxes and arrows, and you put it together and you run it over time to see if that matches the real world. So it's highly, highly disciplined. Saida Falafino gave a talk to a few of us at the end of last year on that. And then, so we're working on those, and then the epiphany came at 3 a.m. when I was in Paris and was jet lagged and thinking about these things, and then suddenly it kind of came together, and I realized how they came together and how they interacted to drive the obesity pandemic. So that's when I got all excited, and I got all my enthusiasm. I cornered Rod at one stage in the lunchroom, and he said, "Oh, I just read about these epiphanies in the Guardian." So he said, so he sent me the article, and this is the epiphany steps. You've got to be saturated with the knowledge. You've got to know your stuff, and deeply know it. And then this incubation where you're working on kind of unrelated things in a conscious way, and then suddenly your unconscious allows them to complete it and join the dots. And then the fourth stage is verification, which I'm doing now, to see if this stuff actually makes sense. So that was quite helpful. Thank you, Rod. So my proposal is that the rise of the obesity pandemic is driven by the emergent properties of two complex adaptive systems and their interaction. And importantly, both of these systems are working perfectly as designed. When you hear people saying the system is broken, it's usually not broken. It's usually working perfectly as designed, but the trouble is the outcomes, the emergent properties from it, are not the things we want. But you get back to the values of the system and you find it's actually working as it's designed. So in simplistic terms, we have an ultra-processed food system which has purpose and feedback loops and creates a bunch of emergent properties. We have an energy balance system which has a purpose and feedback loops and creates properties, and the intersection of them. So these three areas. So just to talk about the purpose of the ultra-processed food system, this won't surprise any of you that it is purely economic, that it creates livelihoods and profits and exports by selling stuff to people who can afford it. And if you're outside those domains, it doesn't care. So that's the ultra-processed food system. The energy balance system, these things were sort of distilled from getting engaged in the system, trying to understand it. So this is what we say the energy balance system is: to ensure food intake approximately meets current energy and protein needs. So the approximately is important because there's an approximation step in here that gets taken advantage of, and prevent the perceived threats to. So we have a preserve what we've got and prevent any threats to the lean tissue mass. So the fat-free mass is what the body is trying to preserve. There's a lot of debate in the energy balance space about what is the body trying to defend. Is it weight? Is it our fat mass? Is it our lean mass, or some combination? I think it's almost predominantly lean mass. That is the engine of the body. That's what needs the energy, and that's what it's trying to preserve. So those two aspects, maintain current and protect against threats, come to play often against each other, as we see. Okay, the complex adaptive system number one, ultra-processed food system, there's a Lancet series published the end of last year, which really highlighted it's all the stuff in the middle of the supermarket. This is what's happening to ultra-processed foods in various regions of the world. It's very high in the high-income areas, increasing in almost all areas. This is us here, Australasia, we're lumped in with North America. And so the question is, we've known these foods are bad for our health for decades, and it's still going up. What's holding it in place or driving it up? So this was the question that Ben and Josh answered, and we created this sort of mind map, if you like, of the system. So around the outside is just a classic capitalist or corporate system, produce the stuff, promote it, get people to consume it. Then they get high profits and you can invest that back and you get a loop there. The two things that this system is worried about, first of all, the profits, and secondly, the benefits. What it does in environmental damage or health damage, they don't care about. Those are externalities. And we divided it up into these 4 domains, 4 subsystems, and that's what we sort of dived into. And this is the the product design one that Josh did. So if the green bit around the outside, purchases, revenue, profits, capability to advance product design, that's just that outside capitalist loop. And then within this, so the more capacity they have, the more they can add sugar, fat, salt, other sensory-related additives, makes it more palatable, activates neurological pathways, gives a pleasurable experience, leads to more purchases. Some people get a bit addicted, leads to more consumption. Then we get taste preferences for it, and so on. So, and we have the perceived values of it. And whenever you buy it, all the data goes back. You can see how you start to build this up around feedback loops. So what have we got? 7 reinforcing loops there. And this is the marketing one, so a bunch of reinforcing loops here as well, 4 or 5 reinforcing loops around brands, brand loyalty, normalization, algorithms, collection of data, and so on. And then the food supply chains and the political economy. So pink is the economic sphere, blue is political, and green is the real food sphere. So, you build all these things up and then you go and find data around it. And so putting all this stuff together, we determined that the ultra-processed food system is highly profitable. There's no question about that. A lot of investment in that. It's designed for expansion. 22 reinforcing loops identified. I'm sure there's a whole lot more. High manipulability of the products, so they can manipulate all of these basic products that come into a factory much more than a potato grower can manipulate their product. It's just different varieties of potato. And high manipulability of actors. That's us. We're in the middle. We're all those blue bits in the middle. We are not, I should have pointed that out, all these blue bits, that's us. The ultra-processed food system is not separate from us and over there. We are embedded deeply within it. So their ability to manipulate us and the politicians and the corner dairy store and the growers is very high. Major benefits and major detriments, globalized, standardized, etc., corporatized. So the outcomes of all of this are we are all semi-willing captives within the system. We get benefits and detriments. And also because the system is so monopolistic and so ubiquitous, it's extremely difficult to escape from. Can't escape from the centre of the supermarket. And it's very difficult to change because of its power. So those are the sort of the emergent properties of that. The energy balance system, I just got to do a little bit of a 101 on energy balance that people may not fully appreciate. But when we gain weight, we gain fat mass and fat-free mass in the ratio of about 3 to 1. So every 4 kilograms you put on, 3 kilograms is fat, 1 kilogram is lean. Bigger heart, bigger liver, bigger muscles, bigger kidneys, that sort of thing. And that lean mass is our energy driving compartment. So that determines our energy needs. Fat mass doesn't burn a lot of energy itself. So obesity is a condition of high fat mass, high fat-free mass, high total energy expenditure, and high energy intake. So that's maybe a bit of a challenge for people to get their heads around. That's just the breakdown of where we spend our energy. Most of it's on the basal metabolic rate. And this is the relationship between fat-free mass along the x-axis here, and this is total energy expenditure. The higher your lean mass, the higher the total energy expenditure, higher resting metabolic rate, higher energy of activity. And so that is the state. That becomes important when we come to these feedback loops. Okay, so this is the system dynamic model of energy balance. It's got a lot of factors in it. The main stocks are the fat-free mass and the fat mass. And each of these arrows in behind it has an equation to lead it to where it's going. And so it can run over time. So I'm not going to get into the details of it. I don't understand a lot of the stuff and the maths behind it, but Saeed is very clever at doing that. And with any systems approach, you have to define your reference mode. What are you trying to explain? And so when you build this model, we say, okay, we want this model to be able to replicate what we see in reality. And that is these 5 conditions that we put this model to the test on. One was just keeping weight stable. That's the most simple. That's where you start. Build the model to just show how you can maintain weight. Slowly increasing weight in an obesogenic environment. This was an experiment with an SGL2 inhibitor, which makes you pee out glucose. So you're just passively losing calories. And that ended up kicking up appetite, and people didn't lose as much weight as you would expect from what they peed out. Regular weight loss diet with a very low energy diet or a period of overfeeding. So we have data for all of those, and you plug the model in and you see if it follows that pattern. And they pretty much do, actually. So the model, we've got quite a lot of confidence in the model. So just to then put up the goal and then to show you some of these loops, which are important. So we have a tonic system, which just maintains our current energy needs. So, you know, it's now the beginning of the year and we are what weight we are. By the end of the year, you'll be pretty much that weight, because although your energy intake's been going like that and your physical activity has been going like that, at the end of the year, you'll be pretty much the same weight. But we have these dynamic subsystems to protect against fat-free mass changes. One of them is passive, and 2 of them are active metabolic dial, active appetite dial. So let's just start with the tonic loop for a start. So fat-free mass is the big driver of energy needs, resting metabolic rate, physical activity, energy expenditure. That's your energy need. That triggers appetite. Appetite triggers food intake. And this is the approximation step. It triggers food intake, and pretty much that equals energy intake. And then we have energy intake, and we come back into energy balance, and that reduces the energy need. So that's the short-term step. But if the food intake that we eat is high in ultra-processed foods, which are energy dense, highly palatable and readily available, then we end up in slight positive energy balance, so-called passive overconsumption. We haven't meant to, but we just kind of eat a few extra calories. And if we eat a bit of that, then that ends up adding to our body weight, and that increases resting metabolic rate, increase energy needs. So there's a positive feedback loop around here. We need to eat more for this higher weight, but also the higher weight has a higher energy expenditure, and that balances it out. So this is a kind of passive approach. There's no active trying to protect anything. This is just the way that the body comes back into energy balance. But now, 10 years down the track, and you've gained 15 kilos and you want to lose it, and you go on a diet. And you do that, and you're not going to try and lose the weight over 10 years. You're going to try and lose it in 6 months. And so that's a drastic change in weight. And the body doesn't like it because it's trying to protect its lean mass. And so it has 2 active dials it can change. One is a metabolic dial, where it can crank down your energy expenditure. So in other words, make your engine more efficient, more fuel efficient. So you're burning fewer calories. You've still got the same fat-free mass, but it's just tuned down your efficiency, and not tuned up your efficiency. So you're more efficient. And an appetite dial, which cranks up your appetite drive. And the appetite dial is actually stronger than the metabolic dial. It hasn't had as much research behind it, only a few studies. But they've shown the power of it. And it's a threshold effect. So that passive loop that I showed you before, when you're just gaining a little bit of weight, doesn't trigger these active responses. But when you lose a lot, it does trigger it. So we had to create this variable called the memory lean mass, because that then becomes a second goal of the system that's trying to protect. So this active system operates whether you are gaining weight or losing weight. But the magnitude for weight loss, the magnitude for how hard it cranks up those dials, is about 30 times how hard it turns up the dial if you're gaining weight. So we end up with this ratchet effect: easy to gain, hard to lose; easy to gain, hard to lose. And that's an experience that a lot of people have had. So just to summarize, this matches the tonic loop, matches the energy intake, and it's the operating system for maintaining our weight, fat-free mass. The passive loops, this is the approximation step, where it kind of fools the approximation step. This is passive, and this is the operating mechanism for how slow weight gain happens under an ultra-processed food diet. And then we have the dynamic compensation, metabolic dials and appetite dials, asymmetric ratchet effect, and this is the operating mechanisms preventing weight loss. So, ultra-processed food system, semi-willing captives, difficult to escape or change. Ultra-processed food times the energy balance, passive overconsumption, slow weight gain, energy balance, ratchet effect, easy to gain, hard to lose. So these things in the centre are the emergent properties, and you need all three to create the pandemic. If the ultra-processed food system was not so ubiquitous, was not so hard to escape, or was relatively easy to change, we wouldn't have a problem. If the that approximation step didn't get fooled by the energy by the ultra-processed foods, the energy-dense ultra-processed foods, then we wouldn't have a problem. We wouldn't get that slow weight gain. Or if it was just as easy to lose weight as gain weight, that wouldn't be a problem either. You need 1, 2, 3 to line up to create the pandemic. So what are the implications for this? So I think there's been a lot of discussion about this NOVA classification of food by level of processing, and but little focus on the actual underlying system of the ultra-processed food system. A lot of the focus is on the foods themselves, which are in, which are out. Can you use it to create policy? Is it a good communication tool? Not kind of understanding the underlying system. So I think that for obesity, the underlying drivers are deeply systemic, and I think that makes it very different from the other chronic diseases that we deal with, like cardiovascular disease and cancer. These are multifactorial, but I don't think they're fundamentally systemic. And I think it makes obesity more like poverty and climate change in its nature, and why it's difficult to change. Two systems are working perfectly. You need all three to get the pandemic. Eating is mandatory. UPFs are ubiquitous, so everyone's trapped. And I think the next step in understanding the different patterns of population increases, we've got to bring in these other factors, is the next challenge. Okay, so what does that mean for interventions? I wish it would lead to a magic solution, but I don't think it does. Can be a little bit depressing, I have to say. But I think it does indicate that we need action at all levels of the ultra-processed food system. We kind of knew that. Most of them are targeted around structural level, so policy, fiscal, institution. They're the most promising. That's the sort of third layer down on the iceberg, if you like. That's the most accessible part. But when we do those interventions, I think we need to amplify the culture and values change. So if you think about other things, other epidemics that we have kind of overcome, and think about tobacco or road injuries or something like that, there's a little bit of policy to start with, and that creates a bit of culture change. You know, they make that corner of the restaurant over there smoke-free, first policy, and then people think, well, why can't we make the whole restaurant, or why can't we make the whole pub or the outdoor stadium or whatever? So it goes this policy culture ladder. I think we have to do it. But to do that, you have to add the values and what are the values you're adding in and the purpose behind these policies. And I think for dealing with the ultra processed food system and constraining it, we need to build in society's values, right for consumers to know. We need good food labeling, protecting children and child rights, reducing marketing to kids, consumer rights not to be exploited around health claims and so on, rights of communities and to say no to the next KFC next to the school. So building in those values so that we kind of get this policy culture ladder going. And then the alternative, which is the real food system, which is the original food system, has that's food system that has other values, and just doing some work in South Auckland at the moment around people trying to do stuff within and build up real food. We've got huge food insecurity problems, so there's food banks and trying to feed people, but there's community gardens, there's social supermarkets, there's all sorts of ways that people do want to get other values into their food system than just the economic values. So I think they need a leg up, and they need to be supported. And if we were going to put in a sugary drinks tax that'll pull out 50 to 100 million bucks, I'd put it into supporting local communities to lift the deal on the real food system, give them breaks on free land or peppercorn rent on land and spaces for social supermarkets and that sort of thing. The school lunch program, which we're also evaluating, has multiple levers for real food. I mean, this is $300 million of injection into the food system, and that can be used for leverage. And in Brazil, they require 30%, soon to be 40% of the food from the school food system coming from local farmers, local small farmers. That the portion of ultra processed food is being cranked down. I think it's less than 10%, or so that's been cranked down, and it's been cranked up the amount of local food. This is a huge policy lever through procurement. And these GLP-1 agonists, just thinking about the energy balance system, this is the first time we've had a drug which will fundamentally influence those feedback loops and shut down that appetite demand that people get. And so I think it's an open question about its level of population impact, a little bit like we've been treating high cholesterol and high blood pressure across swathes of the population, has an impact on the outcome. So
trouble is it's ended its success of the obesity being generated by this.
Okay, we're going to go to your question right now because that's the end of my presentation. So thanks for that. And we'll give you one of those, yeah.
Online can hear.
So the people online can hear your
Yeah.
question. So for it, Janine.
Okay.
Oh, hello. So I was with the weight loss drugs. So I'm assuming that's what the GLP-1 is. That creates in order for that to continue being successful and people making money from those pharmaceuticals, it relies on a continued stream of obesity. So you kind of setting up one system that depends on the other system. So.
Yeah, to some extent, but we do that with antihypertensives and cholesterol lowering drugs. We don't worry about that. It's there. We have to deal with it. People have got problems. They've got risk factors, and here are some drugs that make a difference.
Yeah, I'm not saying that we need to get up, but perhaps we go into it with an awareness.
Yeah,
hopefully we won't need them.
And I think that is a fear that people have. Here's a drug, and you don't have to worry about your weight. But actually, I think the GLP-1s can. The introduction of them can be a lever as well around community programs that will support people and that sort of thing.
Yep, I'll go, Jen. Oh, you take that one and then
Oh. Does this be next?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks, Boyd. Really interesting. I was just maybe a small thing, but I was looking at your description of the energy balance system and describe your description of obesity as a high intake state and so a high consumption state. So in that sense, is obesity kind of a desired outcome of the system from the industry perspective?
No, I don't think it is. No, not at all. And I think that it's a slight accident. They don't mean to make the foods energy dense. They do mean to make them hyper palatable and readily available, but the energy density is one of the big determinants of how much we eat. So, you know, if you go into a cafeteria and you pick up a slice of lasagna and that's what you're going to have for lunch. The amount of energy that's in that could be increased by adding, you know, oil and fat, or decreased by adding vegetables. You take the same slice because you kind of know that's what's going to fill you, and we kind of eat to a weight. And so it's easy to get passive overconsumption when the food we eat is energy dense. Now, the biggest determinant of energy density, fat is a big determinant, but the biggest actually is water. You suck water out of something and then you change the energy density dramatically. All those products in the middle of the supermarket are all relatively dehydrated because they've got shelf lives of months, years. So a lot of them, they've got preservatives and additives and so on, but a lot of them are dehydrated. And so the value of having those products is that you've got a long shelf life. Okay, dehydration makes them energy dense. The adding fat adds palatability and stuff, but that makes it energy dense. So I don't think the industry wants to create obesity. It's a headache for them that they do. They'd prefer to just sell you the products and it didn't create obesity.
Doesn't it increase their profits though?
Oh, you mean because people are now eating more? I don't think that. Yeah, and people have made that argument. I don't think that's what drives them in the corporate offices. That will create obesity, therefore people will eat more, therefore we'll have a bigger market. I don't think that's how they think, but I think that's an outcome of it.
They just want people to eat more, though.
They just want people to eat more.
Yeah. So,
Yep.
sorry, have you?
More of their product.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you, Jamie? Have you finished your question?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So, Boyd, I mean, you've got these two overlapping systems, and they're really complex. Which every system is complex, whether it's cardiovascular cancer. If you look at it's all complex. Now, it seems to me the difference between the obesity kind of construct system versus, you know, you mentioned cardiovascular disease and cancer, is this energy balance system. Now, you didn't really make it clear, but is the energy balance system, I know you say it's easy to get fat, it's easy to put on weight than lose weight. Is the aim of the energy balance system to keep us in balance or to keep us gaining a bit?
No, not gaining a bit. No.
But in natural, but if you have put rats in some special environment and give them more food than they need, just make it, do they
gain weight?
They gain weight?
Absolutely, yeah.
So if you have a system with as much food available as possible, you'll gain weight.
Yeah, but on the cafeteria diet, not on the chow diet.
Sorry?
For rats, you know, there's a standard chow diet.
Okay.
But you put them on a cafeteria diet,
right,
which is all the junk food, then they go, phew.
Okay. So that's the difference. So if you've got ultra processed food, then you're going to gain weight, because
if you've got a high ultra processed food diet,
you're going to gain weight.
Then you're at high risk of gaining weight.
Your energy balance system is not going to keep you in balance if you are eating a high ultra processed.
No, so the
that's
energy
the
balance system does not want us to gain weight.
Yes, but if you're eating,
but its responses are very weak.
Yeah. So basically, it's as simple as this: is that ultra processed food is causing the obesity epidemic because our energy balance system doesn't work when you eat.
That's right. Yeah.
So it's as simple as, I mean, I don't want to make it sound overly simple, because everything is complicated, but everything can be made simple, because interventions to work have to be simple.
Yeah, but
And-
Rod,
and-
if we
It
went,
would be simple, just.
Yep.
So we need to stop eating ultra processed food.
yeah,
or-
I think that's
or we
about,
need to
well,
stop
we
eating
need to bring it
ultra-processed-
down to it. We
Yeah.
can't stop. It gives us so many benefits,
Yeah,
Rod.
but we need to stop eating ultra processed food that's energy dense. So what we need is, if we're going to eat ultra processed food, we need them to make stuff that's not energy dense.
Yeah, but then it won't have a long shelf life. It won't
Well,
be so
that's-
tasty, you know.
That's technical. That's a technical issue, but no, I'm not trying to,
Well-
I'm trying to, just that from a public health perspective, if interventions that work have got to be simple. I mean, complex interventions don't work in public health.
Well, I mean, policies,
Taxation works because,
policy, a simple policy like taxation
yeah,
can
yeah, that's a
work.
simple policy.
I know,
So you've just
but
put a
it
tax
does,
on-
but it does have an effect down at that structural level. And that does have an effect on the system because it's changing the operating conditions of the companies.
But can't we simplify it by just saying, we need to stop eating so much processed food, therefore we'll tax it.
Well,
So you need all this complexity. Sorry, I'm not arguing. I'm not trying to argue that your complex system is not real. I think
Yeah.
that everything in there is real. But the answer is simple, is we need to find ways of reducing energy dense, high ultra processed food consumption.
Yep,
That's the goal.
100%.
It's as simple as that. It's not complex. It's as simple as that. It's hard to do, but the best lever we have is taxation.
Yeah,
or
no, no.
regulation.
Yep, and all those other policies, and I fully agree with that.
So
No,
do you
but
need all the detail, don't you just need to say, given all of this detail, no, sorry, given everything you've explained, which is great to have, what we have to do is to reduce the consumption of high energy, ultra processed food. Therefore, the levers we have that we know work are regulation and taxation.
Yep.
Let's do that.
No, I totally agree, Rod. But
So,
the purpose of what I was trying to do is to explain the pandemic, and to do that, you need that complex systems thinking to be able to do that. No, as I said at the end, it doesn't necessarily give you any different magic bullets for the answer, but it does, as I said, the values, bring in the values and the way we do it. Yeah, you're right. But just one thing on the systems. You know, if you go on a diet and you reduce your blood cholesterol levels, there's no system-wide pushback on that. And so, you know, it is quite different.
I agree.
Yeah.
The energy system is the difference.
Yeah.
It's the difference. Is that with cholesterol, the body doesn't need high cholesterol, and it doesn't need salt, but there are ways of dealing with it.
Yeah.
But yeah. So I think you're right that they're different, but the solutions are simple.
Yeah, simple, hard to get through. Anybody in line, if you want to ask a question, just put your hand up or put in the chat. Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Boyd. I do agree with some of it.
Good.
But I suppose some of the issues for me are, you know, who's actually not doing so badly in the global obesity stakes. And Japan and Korea, for example, their levels of obesity are very, very low. And I'm not sure that we can completely ascribe that to non sort of capitalist food system.
No.
Certainly a lot of capitalist food activity going on in those countries. Just another comment, just sort of thinking about what Rod's saying, what sort of policies work, and something I've seen recently is it's not all a bad news story. Some countries, for example, Mexico, their diabetes rate has turned around, and one of the things that Mexico has done is a sugar tax. So I think we've still got to have an open mind about what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, thanks. So just on those countries, when you look at the ultra processed food consumption, the proportion of our diet, which is ultra processed food, we don't know what it is in New Zealand because we don't bother doing nutrition surveys, but it's probably about 50 to 60% if we're judging by kind of Australia. countries which have a strong traditional cuisine and dietary pattern, Southern European countries, Asia, those Asian countries, they have much lower proportions of their diets as ultra-processed food. So having a strong traditional food system is a protective factor. There's lots of other protective factors in places like Japan and things, I think, as well, which is we try to explain the heterogeneity, kind of the next step. So I do think that the proportion, and we've done some studies comparing that, just ecological studies, the proportion of ultra processed food versus the rise in obesity, and there's relationships there. You're right about Mexico, but it's in most Latin American countries now. Mexico was the first domino, if you like. It took $12 million over 5 years to get the first sugary drinks tax in there, to get all the community organisations and stuff together, and they did it. And now a lot of other countries have done it, as well as front of pack labelling and warning labels and bans on junk food marketing and school food, and bans on claims, health claims and so on. So, yeah, we do know what to do. It's kind of what Rod was saying, that it's this list of policies which operate down at that third level. We just need to try and get that operating in this country, and we haven't been very successful to date. Do you want to just elaborate on that with a microphone?
I was just going to, a comment was that politics possibly are very important to get the policies that we want, because currently we're tipped in favour of a neoliberalism, corporate-friendly government that sort of resists action that protects the communities.
Yeah, it does, and that's allowed this corporatization and the dominance of these big multinationals, but now the politicians are trapped in there as well. You want to implement these 5 policies I want them to do. Politician you're going to find is going to do that. Every single policy is a huge battle. Every single policy, and we want them to do 5. They're trapped. They're semi-willing captors. They might get the tickets to the test match, but on the other side, if they go into battle against the industry, that's got a lot of downside. So they say, "Oh, I've got other problems I need to deal with over here." Yeah, Bruce.
One of the things that this message hasn't got down to the population. I mean, the GPs are not talking to their patients about ultra processed food. That is not part of the narrative. And that seems to me, I don't know, Heart Foundation should be pushing something like that. I know it's difficult working at that political level, but the word isn't out there. It's a bit like rheumatic fever 20 years ago. Nobody knew about sore throats and rheumatic fever. So it's a bit of a problem at that point. GPs don't know what to do.
Yeah, it hasn't reached common parlance, the concept of ultra processed food, and it's a big debating point about whether talking to the public about ultra processed food is a good communication tool. Now, they're doing it in Latin America because it's been around for a while, and they've been driving that, and it's in their dietary guidelines and it's in their policies and so on. So for them, it's now become common parlance, but for us, it hasn't. And there is quite a bit of debate as to whether it's a good communication tool. I think it probably is. I mean, people, pick up a product and they look to see if there's any additives in there that are not in their kitchen. Okay, that's ultra processed food. There are some aspects of the defining ultra processed foods that do make it a good communication tool, but we haven't tested that out here or tried it.
It's just junk food.
Into the
What's junk food?
People know, well, what's ultra processed food? I mean, don't people know, like, that's probably not great to have lots of Coke and, drink lots of sugar. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if telling people. Yeah.
Something about ultra processed food.
Give them the microphone.
Why not do an ASH? Why not have action on ultra processed foods? Which started with smoke-free days. or, you know, groups got together and organizations and they'd have a smoke-free day or a smoke-free week or whatever like this, it would be a good place to start. I mean, that's what they did with ASH. First, they kind of softened up the public and then they went to politicians and then they changed the laws. And I think, you know, we need an organization.
Health Coalition Aotearoa.
Yeah, but but that's too broad. That's too broad. And you make it too complicated. Eat less ultra-processed foods. That's what you want. Have ultra-processed foods free days, then free weeks, and then get the politicians.
Okay, now hold on. Good
Yeah. Anyway.
question over here. Chuck
Yeah,
the thing
yeah,
over.
yeah. I'll throw it.
So if we're particularly talking about ultra-processed foods, we have this group of foods which are like, you know, touted as low fat, low carb, low calories. They are arguably ultra-processed, but then they're not energy dense. So where does that sit?
They do take out some of the energy density, but we did a study some years ago now looking at foods, and the ones that have claims for being low in energy or low in fat or whatever are ultra processed, and their energy density, yes, it is lower than the comparable food that they're making claims against, but the energy density is still higher than real food, and so yep, so the claims can be really quite misleading, I think. Yep, Jamie.
Boyd, it was good to see in your kind of causal loop diagrams.
Stick the microphone closer.
This is
Oh, you got one there. Okay. Yep.
You were talking about political economy as being important, and we've just sort of, you've got this list of things that, you know, we should be doing, and then the question is, why aren't we doing that? And the main part of the answer probably is political economy, right? That
Yeah.
industry doesn't want these things to happen because they would work. In terms of your list of things we might do you have any thoughts about how to engage with political economy in terms of addressing some of those reinforcing loops? And does this kind of new insight have any effect on how we might go about that?
Yeah, so Ben and others are pursuing that. There's things like using antitrust laws and so on. The big player that has come into the political economy is the whole financialization of it, the big black rocks and the big huge investors, and an ultra processed food corporation that says, oh, we're going to make some healthy foods and we're going to try that and test that. They don't do that anymore. They had a bit of a go at it several years ago and say, yep, we're going to make some healthier foods. They weren't selling, they weren't profitable. The big investors come and say, you are selling foods that are profitable because we've got investors that want return on that money. So the influx of private investment into these corporations is a big driver, actually, and we've seen them turn around from adding other things in. Okay, we better stop there, I think.